Chapter 4064. No. Kong Chiao's voice was particularly low. Ruan Yun smiled bitterly. You can't hide it from me. I've been with you for more than 10 years. I can see that you treat her differently from other women. With that, she let go of him. She took a step back. Kong Chiao, find a woman with a clean background to marry. It's good for you. Su Mo, she. Actually, you know what she is like, don't you? She might be sick. Stop it. Kong Chiao clenched his hands. I don't want to hear this. But you know it's the truth. Ruan Yun handed a brown paper bag to Kong Chiao. She's seen a psychiatrist, but recently she gave up treatment. Do you know what this means? Kong Chiao, Su Mo is not the angel you think she is. Her world is a mess. She's not suitable for you. Staying away from her is the smart choice. Kong Chiao, we had a consensus before. You know that, don't you? Kong Chiao lowered his head, looked at the bag in his hand, and then looked at Ruan Yun. You investigated her. His voice was slightly cold. I'm doing it for your own good. I can't watch you fall because of a woman. Kong Chiao, do you know your current status? Among the male stars your age, you are the most popular. Because of your talent and appearance, do you know how many young ladies want to marry you? No matter who you choose, you can't choose Su Mo, because she's a pit, because she's a big trouble. Kong Chiao, you know all this. Kong Chiao slowly drank the red wine in the goblet and said indifferently, You've said so much, so who do you think is suitable? Ruan Yun was stunned and couldn't answer. Kong Chiao sneered. You won't say it's you, will you? Ruan Yun suddenly became a little angry. Kong Chiao. I'm your agent. It's good that you know. Otherwise, I'd think you're my wife. His voice was also cold. Ruan Yun, we've slept together, but it doesn't mean that it's love between a man and a woman. It's just loneliness. Ruan Yun's face was a little pale. Kong Chiao, you've gone too far. Am I going too far or are you going too far? Ruan Yun, from today onwards, you are no longer my manager. Our cooperation ends here. I will ask the finance department to send you the follow-up payment. Kong Chiao's voice was faint. Return my house key to me. Ruan Yun was completely stunned. When she came back to her senses, she anxiously said, Kong Chiao, you can't do this to me. Kong Chiao looked at her and said lightly, We are just cooperating, and didn't you teach me to be indifferent to human feelings? Why is it wrong to use it on yourself? Ruan Yun laughed. She looked at Kong Chiao. You're doing this for that woman, aren't you? Our relationship of more than 10 years can't even compare to a Su Mo. What's so good about her? She doesn't have the same appearance, temperament, or background. Kong Chiao, what do you have that you can't let go? Concho did not answer her, but continued to drink his wine with a very mild air. After a long time, Ruan Yun said bitterly. Kong Chiao said, If I knew, I would probably be able to let go. Ruan Yun looked as though she had been dealt a heavy blow. She looked at Kong Chiao. Concho laughed at himself. Suddenly, Ruan Yun understood. Kong Chiao really did fall in love with Su Mo. Her gaze was a little sluggish, and then she laughed. She won't be with you. Kong Chiao did not say anything. Ruan Yun continued, because Su Mo wasn't the one who put the video on the internet. Chapter 4065. What did you say? Kong Chiao's fingers almost crushed the glass. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at Ruan Yun. Ruan Yun forced a smile. She wanted to say it in a relaxed tone, but she couldn't. Kong Chiao, I was the one who released the video and it had nothing to do with Su Mo. You said you loved her, but did she believe you? Shouldn't you trust someone when you love them? Ruan Yun's eyes were filled with tears. Ruan Yun said with tears in her eyes, I've always loved you and treated you as my family. In order to make you a top celebrity, I sacrificed myself and even missed out on the best years of my youth. I didn't want to get married and I wanted to stay by your side. I thought that we would be partners forever. I thought that when you reached an age where you would be successful and tired of this industry, we would be able to retire. At that time, we would have earned enough money and we would be able to do a lot of things together. But you betrayed me for the sake of an ugly girl. Ruan Yun's voice was filled with an indescribable sense of defeat. If I lost to Wen Yuan, I would accept it. But Su Mo, Kong Qiao, you will regret it. Ruan Yun knew his temper. Once he had made up his mind, he wouldn't change it. She handed over the keys to all his residences and placed them on the wine cabinet. Don't ever see Kong Qiao again. Kong Qiao was still standing there. When Ruan Yun walked to the door, he suddenly said, Wait. Ruan Yun turned around. Thank you for all these years, Kong Qiao said quietly. But just like what Su Mo had said, there was no way to breathe the air in this world. Ruan Yun sneered. Kong Qiao, you will regret it. She turned around and left, maintaining her pride. She, Ruan Yun, was a top manager. After leaving Kong Qiao, she could still support a newcomer and a superstar. Ruan Yun opened the door and left. Kong Qiao was still standing there, his mind filled with Ruan Yun's words. She was the one who released the video, not Su Mo. Ruan Yun was right. Su Mo would never forgive him and would never be with him. In her heart, he was an idiot. The glass in Kong Qiao's hand shattered. The glass pierced into his flesh, but he didn't seem to feel it. It was as if wings had sprouted in his heart. He wanted to go back the way he came, to find Su Mo, but in the end, he still quietly stood in his original place, quietly tasting the taste of loneliness. Was Su Mo also very lonely? But her loneliness was because there was no one in her heart, and he had someone in his heart, but that person seemed to be on the horizon. Su Mo was like a quenched fire, coming in bit by bit, and the warmth in the depths of his heart was squeezed out bit by bit. Kong Qiao actually did not reject it. He stood there for a long time. Then, he found some medicine and simply bandaged his wound. He couldn't fall asleep, and he couldn't fall asleep even after drinking. In the end, he took the car keys. As he started the car, Concho thought to himself, if he accuses me of drunk driving, then isn't he drunk driving too? After some thought, he gave up on driving himself and took a taxi instead. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of her apartment. Kong Qiao gave the driver 200 yuan and got out of the car. The driver was quite happy. Sir, you're too kind. Kong Qiao was a cold-hearted person, but this time her heart softened. Let's pack up early and go back, the family is waiting. The driver's eyes were a little warm, and he nodded. As he started the car, he realized that the man just now seemed a little familiar. Slap his head. Isn't that Kong Qiao? The nation's Prince Charming. Chapter 4066. Kong Qiao walked upstairs and came to Su Mo's door. He raised his hand and hesitated for a moment before knocking. There was no movement inside. He took out his phone and dialed Su Mo's number, but no one picked up. Kong Qiao frowned and called again, but it was still the same. He knew that Su Mo wasn't a heavy sleeper. She wouldn't fall asleep even if she drank a little, and she was even more impatient with him. If he called, she would definitely turn off her phone. But she didn't. His intuition told him that something had happened to her. Kong Qiao took 2 steps back and kicked the door hard. After a few kicks, he felt that his bones were about to break. The door was slammed open and shook violently, almost falling down. Kong Chao didn't care and walked straight in. It was his first time here, so he went to Sumo's bedroom first. When he opened the door, his heart skipped a beat. Sumo was curled up on the bed, her face pale and her hands covering her stomach. Kong Chao walked over quickly. "What's wrong?" The phone was right next to her, but Sumo didn't seem to have the strength to touch it. When he spoke, she felt it. In reality, she was already half asleep and half awake. Her eyes opened a little, revealing a bit of her pupils as she looked at him. Kong Chao didn't hesitate. He picked her up and walked out. When he reached the door, he went back to get her car keys. Sumo woke up a little, but her stomach hurt so much that her voice was like a kitten. "Kong Chao, you drank." He put her next to him. It would be better for her to lie in the back seat, but he was still worried. He fastened the seat belt for her and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't talk. I'll take you to the hospital." He had a feeling that Sumo's illness couldn't be light. There was a touch of sadness in his heart, which made him want to ask her, "How does it feel to light up someone else and burn yourself? Does it hurt?" Sumo was in pain, but she still forced a smile. "Kong Chao, you're drunk driving. Don't talk." He looked a little serious and immediately started the car. He drove so fast that Sumo felt like she was about to lose speed. She couldn't help saying, "Kong Chao, slow down. Something will happen." He didn't slow down. His facial muscles were a little twisted. He said very slowly, "Sumo, if something happens, it'll be good if we die together." Tragic and stirring, just like the nights they had spent together, there was nothing bad about dying together. Sumo didn't say anything. She was in so much pain that she clutched her stomach and almost cried. While driving, Kong Chao called Chinamo. Although it was very late, he still called him. Even if he owed him a favor in the end, he still called him because he wanted to find the best doctor for Sumo. There were only 5 doctors in B City, the whole country, and the whole world, and that doctor was Chin Chen. And Chin Chen was Chin Mo's younger sister. At night, Chin Mo quickly answered the call. Although he was with He Huan, it had been more than half a year since they last slept together. Chin Mo did not stop. He continued to stare at He Huan as he asked his beloved general, "What's the matter with Kong Chao?" "Sumo is sick, I want to ask Dr. Chin to take a look at her." Kong Chao's voice was very soft. He had never sounded so nervous before. He rarely spoke in such a subservient manner. Although he had always been an artist of King Entertainment, he had always been very independent. Chapter 4067. Chin Mo continued, his gaze falling on He Huan's face. Her cheeks were a little rosy, and her short hair was also wet with sweat. This made her look especially pleasing to the eye. It proved that she was his wife and woman, a woman he could sleep with whenever he wanted. Whenever he wanted to. Although it was only once or twice a year. But after being caught by Chin Mo once or twice, He Huan would lose a layer of skin even if she didn't die. It was common for her to be tied to the bed for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't know how many times she had done it tonight, but Chin Mo still looked very interested. He Huan practically climbed off the bed and went straight to the bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Chin Mo didn't mind. He would come back later anyway. Leaning against the headboard, he casually lit a cigarette. "It's not a problem for me to say it, but Chin Chen is very expensive." Actually, Chin Chen's point is that she is expensive. "I don't care how many cancer patients she has saved expensive." Kong Chao gripped the steering wheel. "No matter how much it is, I can accept it." Chin Mo smiled. "Okay, I'll call her right away. You'd better send Sumo to Xingyuan Hospital." Kong Chao nodded. Got it. So President Qin immediately called his sister. Qin Chen was naturally very unhappy to be dug out in the middle of the night. President Qin coaxed her for a long time. It's King Entertainment's popular fried chicken. Sister, you have shares in it too. He's also earning a lot of money for you. Okay, brother, I'll go. But since it's the popular fried chicken, he doesn't lack money. Don't feel sad that I'm taking advantage of your beloved general. Qin Chen said as he tugged on a shirt and put on Lan Yu's pants. Lan Yu sat up. Emergency. I'll send you. Qin Chen pressed his shoulder. Go to sleep. You still have to go to work tomorrow. I'll sleep in the lounge after I'm done. I won't see any patients if there are no surgeries tomorrow. Lan Yu was worried. Qin Chen kissed him and said, I'm a doctor. He insisted. I'll be back soon after I send you there. It won't take up much time. You can calm down in the car. Qin Chen did not refuse. At the same time, her brother, Qin Mo, seemed to have no moral integrity. After putting down the phone, he went straight to the bathroom. He Huan had just finished showering and was about to come out when Qin Mo picked her up. Let's shower together. Her body was very small, so she was lifted up high by him. Her feet could not touch the ground, and could only reach his knees. Qin Mo pressed her leg and said hoarsely, You don't think I'll let you go, do you? He Huan leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. I don't want to be here. Because it's gonna hurt. After this battle, his muscles and bones would be severely injured. Do it here. Qin Mo whispered against her and kissed the corner of her mouth. Because they had done it a few times, he was not too eager, but he still wanted it. It had been too long since the last time. Every time they did it, he didn't know when the next time would be. This time, he accidentally caught her. He didn't know that she was friends with Su Mo and actually attended the banquet. He held her with one hand. Then, He Huan let out a muffled groan and bit his shoulder gently. Her voice was hoarse. Haven't you had enough? How many times is enough? His voice was soft. You've starved me for too long. He Huan didn't say anything else. She just lay on his shoulder and silently endured it. He nibbled on her delicate little neck. How many days do you want this time? He Huan closed her eyes. 3 days. I'm going to see Yi Huan tomorrow. Do you want to go with me? Chapter 4068. Let her sleep on her own, or coax her to sleep. You'll sleep with me. He was negotiating with her, as though it wasn't easy to negotiate. He Huan kicked him. I'm her mother, so why do you care? Originally, he was quite gentle this time around, but after she kicked him, he gazed at her deeply. After a long time, he said in a low voice, You ran away after giving birth to her and ran all over the world. You only see her a few times a year. He Huan, is there a mother like you? If it weren't for the photos, Yi Huan wouldn't have recognized you. After saying that, he became really rough. He Huan's fingernails dug into his flesh. If it weren't for what you did back then, would I have left? I've already said that I didn't do anything to let you down. Qin Mo's voice was low and husky as he searched for her lips and kissed her forcefully. She had never forgiven him and was always abroad, so he could only see her a few times a year. So, at this moment, Qin Mo's heart was filled with frustration, so he used more force, torturing her to death. He Huan thought that was the end of the night, but after a simple shower, he carried her to the bedroom and laid on top of her. He didn't let her go for the entire night. But after doing it, it was just like before, even emptier. She still hadn't forgiven him. Sometimes, Qin Mo didn't know how long they were going to do this. He knew that she was wasting time with him, and he also knew that she wanted a divorce. She refused to stay in the country without seeing him, and refused to be by his side. She was so heartless that she didn't even want a child. She actually hated him to the core. Juan fell asleep, but Chin Mo didn't feel sleepy at all. He leaned against the headboard and smoked lightly, occasionally looking at her. His gaze was filled with longing. Actually, it wasn't that he hadn't thought of giving up on Juan to start a new life, but, after so many years, he still couldn't let go of her. Qin Chen and Kong Chiao arrived at Xingyuan Hospital almost at the same time. Qin Chen changed into a white robe and entered the examination room. When he came out, his expression was a little heavy. Kong Chiao went over. "How is she?" Qin Chen looked at him calmly. "Her stomach isn't too good." Concho's heart sank. Qin Chen continued, "You have to remove half of your stomach. It won't affect your life in the future. At most, you'll have to eat less and eat more. But if you don't remove it, it'll be very dangerous. The probability of cancer is 100%. Kong Chao's expression was somewhat startled. Qin Chen asked again, "Does she have any relatives?" "You have to sign it." Her words were like a splash of cold water on Kong Chao's face. It took him a long time to recover his senses. "She has no relatives, let me sign it." "You can sign it, but it has to be a legal spouse." Qin Chen asked seriously, "Will you marry her?" Qin Chen had always been a very calm person. He was very good at tricking others, and those who fell into his trap would not feel it. Concho's emotions were carried away by her, and he said without thinking, "I will marry her." Qin Chen smiled and winked at the young nurse. The young nurse looked at her with lustful eyes. She stepped forward and handed over the surgical form. "Everything is ready." Kong Chiao took it and felt that it weighed a few thousand pounds. After a moment, his handsome face became slightly restrained, and his voice was a little low. "I want to see her." "Sure, but it'll take 2 minutes. She can't be delayed." Qin Chen said with a smile, but there was not a trace of relief in her eyes. Kong Chiao stared at her eyes for a moment, and without hesitation, he quickly signed the form. "I believe you." Chapter 4069. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Latest chapter. Qin Chen smiled again. This time, it seemed a little warmer. She smiled and said, "The surgery is very expensive, but it's expensive for a reason. I guarantee that there won't be any scars in the future." Kong Chiao didn't care about this, and he and Su Mo weren't in this relationship anymore, so Su Mo probably wouldn't forgive him. After he signed, he watched as Qin Chen walked quickly. "Prepare the blood bag, the surgery is about to begin." Qin Chen suddenly turned around and said, "About 4 hours. Kong Chiao, are you going to wait here?" Kong Chiao pursed his lips and nodded. "I will." Qin Chen smiled again and said, "Indeed, a good man should wait for a woman, not let her wait." She was about to leave when Kong Chiao said, "By the way, tell Su Mo that when Yuan will come to accompany her when she wakes up. I'll be there too. She's not a human." Qin Chen's eyes flickered, then he immediately went to disinfect, changed into a surgical gown and entered the operating room. After the injection, Su Mo felt a little better and was quietly lying down. Qin Chen went over, bent down and said softly, "The surgery is about to begin. There's no danger, and you'll only be healthier in the future. Also, Kong Chiao asked me to tell you that he called when Yuan and asked him to accompany you." As Qin Chen spoke, he gently touched Su Mo with his hand. "Someone who has been loved by God." Su Mo's eyes widened, but before she could say anything, Qin Chen had already anesthetized her back. It was dark. She was in a trance and then darkness. But this darkness was also reassuring, maybe because someone was waiting for her outside. Qin Chen was completely focused on the surgery, only revealing her eyes, which were completely devoid of emotion. However, when she saw the tears at the corner of Su Mo's eyes, she whispered to the nurse beside her, "Wipe her tears away." It was the first time that she saw an anesthetized person cry. The nurse nodded. Then, she looked at Qin Chen's precise movements and couldn't help but say, "Dr. Qin, you're so energetic. If I hadn't been tortured by Mr. Lon for a few hours at night, I would be more energetic now." Qin Chen said calmly. The nurse was a little distracted. Qin Chen's voice became a few degrees colder. "Check the blood pressure." The nurse immediately stopped joking around. About 3.5 hours later, Qin Chen came out of the operating room. Kong Qiao leaned against the wall and walked over. "How is she?" "He's in the intensive care unit. If it's not a big problem, we can see him tomorrow morning. We'll move to the ordinary VIP room tonight." Qin Chen took off his gloves and pulled off his mask. "You should rest. She hasn't woken up yet. The earliest she will wake up is dawn." Kong Qiao straightened his body. "I can't sleep. Ward V00. "You can rest there," Qin Chen said calmly. "Or do you want to have a cup of coffee in my office?" After all, the surgery fee was sky high. It was reasonable to treat him to a cup of coffee. Kong Qiao's throat tightened. After a long time, he said, "No need, thank you. I want to see her." Qin Chen smiled and patted his shoulder like a brother. "Feelings are like making love. You have to take it slow." Kong Qiao felt like he was struck by lightning. Qin Chen passed by him. Kong Qiao still couldn't come back to his senses. After a long time, he turned to look at Qin Chen and watched her leave. He was really like the legend, but not quite the same. She was very mysterious. She was a person that even Kong Qiao couldn't understand. In fact, it didn't matter whether he understood or not. As long as he could afford it, Qin Chen would provide the best medical services. Only if he couldn't afford it, there was nothing he couldn't cure. Today's Chapter 5. There are still 2 chapters left. I've been writing slowly recently. I'll try to finish it at 10:40. Chapter 40-70. Qin Chen returned to her office and brewed a cup of coffee. She then looked at her watch. It was already 5:00. It was early summer and the sky was already bright. Oh my God, it was starting again. When the coffee was ready, she went over to pour it and savored it carefully. After finishing the cup, she went to wash her body, changed into a clean set of clothes and slept comfortably in the lounge. Qin Chen was someone who was used to enjoying life. The furniture here was also extremely luxurious, not any worse than at home. She was also extremely tired. Last night, she was tortured by Lon Yu 3 or 4 times. She didn't know where he got the energy from at his age, and there was another surgery at night. She really couldn't do it without 30 million yuan. Qin Chen closed her eyes slightly, hugging another pillow. Before she fell asleep, she wondered if Lon Yu had woken up. He seemed to be going on a business trip today, which was why he was so excited last night. Yeah, she still had to pick up the child in the afternoon. Of course, every time she went to school, the teacher would think that she was Lon Xiaoxiao's father or a very handsome uncle. As for the older one, she had already been sent overseas. The younger one was still a little big. Originally, Lon Yu wanted to send her overseas. Qin Chen didn't mind, but Lon Yu's father refused, saying that if he sent Xiao Xiao overseas, he would fight it out with Lon Yu. So, when Lan Yu was going on a business trip, Qin Chen played the role of a father and a mother at home. Outside, she was a father, and at home, she was a mother. She could even switch between calling Xiao Xiao smoothly. It was very magical. Qin Chen fell asleep with a smile. After she fell asleep, she dreamed of Cece, dreamed of their days in America. Occasionally, she would also dream of Rong Lei, dreamed of that flower field. But when she woke up, she would always be in Lan Yu's arms, and he would kiss her awake. So, she returned to the human world. This kind of life was wonderful. She was still the handsome Qin Chen. She could still keep her hair short, wear shirts and suits, as long as she was happy. But at home, she had to let Lan Yu do whatever he wanted. It could be considered as both sides making concessions. Marriage, it seemed, was not bad. At least, among her siblings, Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang were doing well. Only Qin Mo and He Huan. After so many years, they were still lukewarm. Qin Chen was in a daze when she picked up the call from Lan Yu. Her eyes were still closed. Lan Yu's voice was very gentle. Sleeping. She snorted to express her displeasure at having her sleep interrupted, so Lan Yu's voice became gentler. I'm going to the airport later, this time to Zhou. Don't forget to pick up Xiao Xiao in the afternoon. If you're busy with work, you can ask my dad to take care of her for a few days. Qin Chen nodded. I'll pick Xiao Xiao up at Dad's place in the afternoon and then bring her to our place. I have 2 shifts to do this week as well. Lan Yu, hurry and come back. She was acting coquettishly. His heart was about to melt. Qin Chen rarely acted coquettishly, and it would only happen a few times a year. He nodded his head. I will. This time, I'll go and see my son. You should behave yourself at home and stop flirting with little girls. Otherwise, their old mothers will come to your door and say that you got their daughter pregnant. That won't be good. Qin Chen snorted. I don't have that ability. Did they find the wrong person? They should be looking for you, right? After all, only you have the ability to get a girl pregnant. Mrs. Lan, Mr. Lan had a vasectomy. He was both angry and amused. So, you're the only one who can get her pregnant. Chapter 4071. Qin Chen snorted. If she does that again, I'll give her a baby. Lan Yu said helplessly, Chen Chen, don't seduce women again. Qin Chen hung up the phone with a snap. Lan Yu smiled affectionately and started the car to head to the airport. Qin Chen put down his phone and lay down again, but he didn't fall asleep. He got up and went to the ICU to see the new patient. Kong Qiao was still there. She stood there like a fool. Qin Chen walked over and smiled faintly. He stood side by side with Kong Qiao. Is she awake? Kong Qiao shook her head. Not yet. Qin Chen glanced at him again and was about to leave when Wen Yuan came over. She was panting and her face was pale. Kong Qiao, where's Su Mo? Kong Qiao looked into the ward and saw Su Mo lying on the bed with a pale face. Wen Yuan was stunned. What happened to her? Kong Qiao said in a low voice, she had half of her stomach removed. Qin Chen paused and came back. Her stomach is very bad. If it continues to develop, it will become cancerous. It has a lot to do with her smoking and not paying attention to her diet. She paused. Take good care of her. It's best not to let her be alone. She suddenly lowered her voice. She needs love. Qin Chen left and gave the space to Kong Qiao and Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan's fingers were flat against the glass, and he said in a low voice, I didn't take good care of her. In the past 2 years, she knew that Su Mo was unhappy. She was always alone, but every time when Yuan met her, she always pretended to be fine. When Yuan said softly, "Kong Chiao, thank you," she could imagine going to the hospital in the middle of the night. Qin Chen was the chief surgeon, so it must have been very dangerous last night. She was a little afraid of losing Su Mo. Kong Chiao stood beside her and said in a low voice, "When Yuan, you don't have to thank me, because I will be the one thanking you for taking care of her in the future." When Yuan was a little surprised, she looked at Kong Chiao. Kong Chiao smiled lightly, "Because I want to be with her." She might not be able to accept it for the time being, but no matter how long it takes, I will wait. After Wen Yuan, he had never wanted to spend the rest of his life with another woman. Back then, he had only gotten together with Su Mo because of a man's desire. He did not know when it started, but he could not let go of her. After Kong Chiao finished speaking, Wen Yuan was a little surprised. However, what was unexpected was that Su Mo was a very good girl. She looked at Su Mo and whispered, "When she's better, I'll take her to live with me." "Kong Chiao, I don't care about your relationship, but can you respect her?" He said yes. When Yuan looked at him and smiled lightly. Kong Chiao repeated what Qin Chen had said, "Relationships are like making love, you have to take it slow." That's what Qin Chen said. When Yuan was speechless, Kong Chiao looked at Su Mo. At this time, Su Mo woke up and opened her eyes. Everything was white. Through the glass, she saw Kong Chiao, Wen Yuan, and Yimubai walking over. Su Mo's eyes were a little moist, thinking of what he said about her not being human. Now, it seemed that there were a lot of people accompanying her. 2 tears fell from the corner of Su Mo's eyes, as if they had dripped into Kong Chiao's heart and corroded it. He looked at her, wishing that he could smash the glass immediately so that he could go in and talk to her and accompany her. The nurse went over and did a simple check. Then, she called Qin Chen, "Dr. Qin, the patient is awake." Chapter 4072. She didn't know what Qin Chen said, but the nurse nodded and changed Su Mo's drip. She walked out and said, "You can see him, but not for more than 10 minutes. The patient can't eat now and will be very weak after the surgery." Kong Chiao nodded and was about to go in. Wen Yuan stopped him. "Kong Chiao," Wen Yuan's voice was gentle but firm. "You said to take it slow. Before you succeed, I will take care of Su Mo." Kong Chiao was stunned for a moment, then he clenched his fingers. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Wen Yuan asked him to go in first. She had something to say to Yimubai, or she knew that Yimubai had something to say to her. After the door was closed, she said softly, "As you can see, I want to take care of Su Mo. I have 4 rooms at my place that can accommodate him." Yimubai said helplessly, "You said you moved out to live with Su Mo, right?" He put his arm around her shoulder. "I bought another house across the street. When I live there, you can spend the night at my place." When Yuan glared at him, he surrendered. "Then we'll have sex secretly in the future. Living apart is not supposed to be like living alone." When Yuan pinched his waist. "I'll go in first. You go to the company first. I'll be fine here." Yimubai looked at the time and said goodbye to her. When Yuan watched him go to the elevator and then went in. She didn't go in before because she wanted Kong Chiao and Su Mo to talk first. Now that she went in, Kong Chiao was half squatting there, but the 2 of them didn't say a word. When Yuan went over and squatted so that it would be easier for Su Mo to see. She didn't say anything but gently touched Su Mo's face. Su Mo's eyes were a little red, but she didn't say anything. When Yuan said in a low voice, "When you're discharged, we'll live together." Xiangnan and Yi Hui too. Sumo's hand moved and she gently held Wen Yuan's hand, although it was extremely difficult for her to do it. Wen Yuan smiled. Sumo also smiled at her. Then her gaze fell on Kong Chao's face. Quietly, her lips moved, and she mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Kong Chao knew that bringing her to the hospital did not mean that she would agree to be with him. Love was not a business, and she would not change everything just because she was touched. That was a decision that only a child would make. He respected Sumo's choice and would not give up. Sumo was too weak and couldn't eat, so they went out first. Wen Yuan looked at Kong Chao. "I know you want to stay here. How about this, you go to the ward and take a nap. I'll stay here and keep watch. When I go to class at 1 p.m., you can come and take my place." Concho thought about it and agreed. But he said he had to go home. Wen Yuan watched him. "I suddenly thought of my mother," Kong Chao said, placing her hand on Wen Yuan's shoulder. "I want to go see her and talk to her." Wen Yuan was touched. She nodded. "Say hello to the teacher." Kong Chao grunted and looked at Sumo. He left and drove back to the house where his mother lived. Teacher Kong had a class at the Home of Love today. She was a little surprised to see her son come back early, so she asked Kong Chao to drive her. If there was anything, they could talk on the way. Kong Chao opened the car door and let Teacher Kong get in. Teacher Kong frowned as soon as she got in. "You drank." "I drank last night. I'm already awake now." Kong Chao started the car. Teacher Kong was still worried. "Don't drink too much. You're not a child anymore." Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 4073. Kong Chao nodded. "I know, Mom." Teacher Kong continued, "You still know that I'm your mom. Look at you, you don't even care about my wishes anymore. You're not young anymore, Mom, I want to get married." Kong Chao said suddenly. Mrs. Kong knew that he had something to say, but she didn't expect him to be so direct. She paused. "Which family is it?" Kong Chao stopped the car at the intersection and waited for the traffic light to turn red. He thought for a while and said slowly, "It's Sumo." Teacher Kong smiled lightly. "Sumo is a good girl. She's nice and good-looking." Kong Chao smiled as well. "Mom, she's really nice but her looks are average, right? Would you like her if she's average?" Mrs. Kong hit the nail on the head. She felt that if her son was interested in her, she must be good-looking. Kong Chao was still smiling faintly. He held the steering wheel and focused on the road. His expression was a little charming. Teacher Kong hadn't seen such a sincere smile from her son for a long time. His smile was the same as her students', tired and hypocritical. She had wanted to tell him that she didn't like him for a long time. Well, he was a little handsome now. Kong Chao turned his head and said softly to his mother, "Sumo might not be able to accept me immediately because of my bad past. She's in the hospital now and I want to take care of her." His voice was gentle and affectionate. "Mom, if Sumo doesn't agree, I might have to be a bachelor for a long time, or I might lose a lot to take care of her, such as fame and fortune, or my career. But I promise I'll take good care of you too." Teacher Kong looked at his son. Kong Chao didn't know what she meant and kept looking at his mother. After a while, Teacher Kong sighed. "Kong Chao, you're finally at peace now." Kong Chao wanted to ask again but the red light turned green. He sent his mother to the Home of Love. When Teacher Kong got off the car, she turned to look at Kong Chao. "Go after the girl you like." Kong Chao, "Mom never cared about what you said and I won't in the future. I have a pension so you don't need to take care of me." You just need to take care of your wife and kids. Don't let them suffer and don't feel wronged. Kong Chow's thin lips pursed, and finally, he smiled slightly. Teacher Kong also smiled. I'll go and see Su Mo later. Is she all right? The surgery was done by Dr. Chin. Kong Chow whispered. Dr. Chin's medical skills will not be wrong. Teacher Kong thought for a moment. Let her rest assured about the things here. I will take care of it. Concho, who was about to drive away, suddenly got out of the car and hugged his mother. Teacher Kang's nose felt a little sour. His son hadn't been like this for a long time. She knew he hoped for her approval, and he was afraid she would not. In fact, how could she disagree? She felt that Su Mo was quite good. Teacher Kong felt that finding someone to marry and fall in love with was just finding someone you really wanted. If you thought too much, what was the difference between that and finding a manager? When she went over, she saw that Kong Chow's manager wasn't very happy about it. He said that it was best not to have a relationship while his career was on the rise, let alone get married. Kong Chow relied on his talents to make a living, not his looks. Why couldn't he fall in love, marry, and have children? Chapter 40-74. Teacher Kong smiled as he watched his son leave. Kong Chow drove away and went back to his place to sleep for about 2 hours. He wanted to make some porridge for Su Mo, but then he remembered that the nurse said she couldn't eat for a few days, not even liquid food. His heart ached faintly and his heart ached. He washed his face and went to the hospital. When Yuan was still there and smiled when he saw him. You're here. I'll go to school with you and come over at night. I heard that you can go to a normal ward at night. Kong Chow nodded. When Yuan left, he suddenly said, I told my mother. When Yuan turned around, she looked at him and understood what he meant. She nodded and said, good luck then. Kong Chow smiled and walked over to hug Wen Yuan. His voice was hoarse in her ears. Wen Yuan, thank you. I really need this kind of encouragement. Good luck. Wen Yuan patted his back. I hope you and Su Mo can be happy. She didn't ask anything. Even if Kong Chow was a suspected HIV carrier according to Su Mo, Wen Yuan believed that Kong Chow was still the warm Kong Chow. His true self was the warmth that he had once given. She stepped back and said gently, I'm going. Take care of yourself. Kong Chow nodded and watched her leave. When he turned his head around, he saw that Su Mo had woken up. She was looking at him quietly with tears in the corner of her eyes. He knew that she wanted to cry, so he placed his palms on the transparent glass and murmured, Don't cry. Su Mo looked at him quietly for a long time before her lips curled up. At around 5 p.m., Qin Chen came over to check on her. After confirming that there was no problem, he transferred her to the VIP ward. It was very expensive, 30,000 yuan per night. But it was nothing compared to the surgery fee of 30 million yuan. After moving over, Qin Chen gave some instructions before leaving. Kong Chow sat beside Su Mo. At this moment, he was so close to her and it felt real. Before, they were separated by the glass and it felt like they were worlds apart. Their relationship was subtle, so he didn't hold her hand and only whispered, Tell me if you feel uncomfortable. Su Mo looked down. It's fine as long as there's a nurse. There were 2 nurses assigned to the VIP ward. She did not want Kong Chow to be there, not only for emotional reasons, but also for physical reasons. The urethral catheter was not removed after the surgery, so her face must be yellow. Although she did not pay much attention to her appearance, a woman would not want to see her in such a pathetic state in front of a man, especially when the urine bag was full, a big bag. Just thinking about it made her drunk. However, Kong Chao did not care, nor would he have thought of this. He only felt that she was so fragile now, and she had no relatives, so he wanted to accompany her. Su Mo heaved a sigh of relief when the nurse came over and said that she was going to remove the catheter. However, Kong Chao was not happy. It's only one day after the surgery, and you're pulling it out. What else? The young nurse was speechless. The surgical wound is only 5 centimeters, and it's healing very well now. Mr. Kong, no woman is willing to use a catheter. Kong Chao still wanted to persist. He felt that Su Mo's body had a knife wound. If he got up and went to the toilet, it would be very inconvenient and painful. Just as he was about to speak, Su Mo said, I also want to pull it out. Kong Chao looked at her. Are you really going to pull it out? Yes. She was a little weak and waited for a long time. Aren't you going out? Kong Chao was a little speechless. Why should I go out? End of this chapter. Chapter 4075. Su Mo gritted her teeth. I'm going to remove the catheter. Aren't you going out? Kong Chao looked at her and blinked. Do you need to go out? Only outsiders need to go out. Su Mo, we're going to get married in the future. The nurse on the side felt very excited. Kong Chao was proposing. And it was Su Mo. She really looked like a flower on the side of the road. The nurse almost wanted to do a live broadcast. Brothers, Kong Chao's large-scale proposal scene, start sending gifts, double-click 666. But it was impossible to do a live broadcast, so she could only stare at Su Mo's reaction. Su Mo was angry. If you don't go out, I'll sue you for adultery. Adultery. The young nurse sucked in a sharp breath. Kong Chao looked at Su Mo. Girls should be more civilized. In fact, he wanted to say that even if he was adultery, he would still choose a prettier one. Su Mo would be his wife. Of course, he didn't say it out loud. He just stood up. I'll go out first. He was very gentlemanly, which made Su Mo angry again. The nurse waited for Kong Chao to go out and said in a low voice, Miss Su, when will you and Kong Chao get married? Can you give us a wedding invitation and sign it with Kong Chao's name? We won't get married, Su Mo said softly. We're not in a relationship. As soon as she finished speaking, she groaned. It hurt. When she pulled the catheter out, it was very painful. She seriously suspected that the nurse was dissatisfied with her answer, so she pulled it hard. The nurse smiled. According to experience, it's better to get the pain over with. You're much better now, aren't you? Su Mo frowned. I want to go to the bathroom. Just then, Kong Chao pushed the door open and came in. I'll help you. The two nurses looked at each other. It was true love. They really wanted to keep the catheter and let Kong Chao sign it and auction it online. The nurse went out and Kong Chao closed the door. Su Mo lay on the bed. I don't need you. Then go by yourself. He didn't care and just stood there. He wanted to pursue her and be with her, but he wasn't a good man and wouldn't give in to her. He was still Kong Chao, a little sharp-tongued. Su Mo stared at him and her eyes became a little misty again. Then she turned her head and ignored him. He walked over and lowered his voice. Are you angry again? His voice was hoarse. I'll carry you and try not to touch your wound. Seeing that she didn't say anything, he picked her up. Su Mo struggled. Don't move. It's very painful when the wound opens. You'll have to stitch it up again. Needle by needle, you'll be in so much pain this time without anesthesia. He looked at her, intending to frighten her. Sumo's lips moved, and after a long time, he squeezed out a sentence, I didn't say I wanted to be with you. He carried her to the bathroom easily and said while serving her, but I want to be with you. Sumo was slightly taken aback. He didn't realize that he was the one who had personally served her from the beginning to the end. She had been seen naked. When she came back to her senses, he had already retreated to the side. She sat on the toilet, embarrassed and angry. Knowing that she was angry, his voice was gentle. It's nothing. Where haven't I seen and touched? I won't laugh at you. Don't be angry, or you'll be the one in pain. Sumo turned his head to the side, feeling like he was in a very sorry state. After a long time, she bit her lip. It hurts. Where? He thought that her wound hurt and wanted to check it. Tomorrow's update. Chapter 4076. Kong Chao thought it was the wound, so he said instinctively, let me take a look. Sumo was stunned. She stared at him blankly for a long time and couldn't say a word. After all, Kong Chao was a mature man. He quickly figured out that she wasn't talking about the wound of the scalpel, but somewhere else. He was a mature man after all, so he walked over and closed the door. He said softly, let me take a look. Sumo was really speechless and weak. What do you mean? Kong Chao stared at her and said softly, lower your pants a little more. Let me see. Sumo really couldn't stand it anymore. Kong Chao, there's nothing between us. It's like a blank piece of paper, isn't it? His voice was very soft. Sumo's voice became quiet and she looked at him quietly. He smiled lightly. Let me see. Maybe it's a doctor. Choose one. Qin Chen might be off work. Maybe it's a male doctor. Sumo stared at him. But in the end, she still let him see. Kong Chao carefully examined it and looked at her. It might be a little inflamed after a long time. Let the nurse put some medicine on it later. Sumo endured the pain to urinate. He helped her pull up her clothes and carried her back to the ward. Just then, when Yuan came over. He didn't come alone, but brought Teacher Kong along. When they came, Kong Chao was bending down and carefully putting Sumo on the bed. He didn't get up immediately. Instead, he leaned forward and looked at Sumo as if he was going to kiss her. Teacher Kong and Wen Yuan looked at each other at the door. What should they do? Should they stay still or disturb them? After all, Sumo was sick now, and her son couldn't really do anything. Wen Yuan's eyes were playful. Just stay still and keep quiet. The two of them stood at the door. Kong Chao couldn't see them because his back was facing them, but Sumo saw them, including Kong Chao's mother. She felt very uncomfortable. Wen Yuan, Teacher Kong and the others are here. Sumo's voice was weak. She put her hand on Kong Chao's shoulder and wanted to push him away, but Kong Chao was in front of Wen Yuan and his mother, so he took the opportunity to kiss her. Sumo was stunned. He said softly, that's my answer. Sumo was still in a daze, her hand caressing the place where she had been kissed. Teacher Kong spoke up, Sumo is sick now, Kong Chao, don't torture her. Concho maintained the same gesture, and gazed at her in the same manner, but he smiled. His smile was very charming, and his teeth were very white. Sumo's mind was in a mess. All right, I won't torment her, said Concho, and straightened himself up. He continued to stare at her for a few seconds before turning to his mother. Why did you come here with Wen Yuan? He naturally helped his mother over to sit on the edge of the bed. This was a very affectionate gesture. Only family members would sit on the edge of the bed. Sumo wasn't dead, so of course she could feel it. Thus, she turned her gaze to Wen Yuan, hoping that he could help her out. However, Wen Yuan pretended that he didn't understand, couldn't see, and didn't understand, and completely implemented the no policy. Su Mo had no choice but to deal with Teacher Kong. However, Teacher Kong knew that Su Mo was the person her son wanted to marry. After such a major surgery, Kong Chiao's method was really too unreasonable and too torturous. She sighed. He should take good care of her. He really shouldn't be like this. Good boy, don't think too much. Take good care of her. I won't let him mess around. Chapter 4077. Kong Chiao stood by the bed like a responsible husband. He smiled. Mom, even if I want to mess around, I can't. She just finished her surgery and she thinks too badly of me. Mr. Kong turned his head and glared at his son. Kong Chiao smiled and didn't say anything. On the contrary, Su Mo couldn't take it. She simply said a few words and said that she wanted to sleep. Mr. Kong gently covered her with the quilt. Although it was a simple action, Su Mo's closed eyes were a little moist. She felt indescribably sad or a little throbbing. All her relatives had left and she only had Wen Yuan. But Mr. Kong was an elder, just like how her mother felt to her. She wanted to cry, but she held it in. Wen Yuan stood and watched quietly. The reason why she was on Kong Chiao's side was because he had a good mother. She believed that Kong Chiao was sincere and Mr. Kong would take care of Su Mo as his own daughter. There was nothing better than this. She could take care of Su Mo, but there were many things that she couldn't replace. Su Mo couldn't eat and had to rest. With the mother and son of the Kong family around, Wen Yuan was relieved. So, she left at 8:00 in the evening. Back at the apartment, Yimubai picked up the two children at home. One was watching TV in the living room. When Wen Yuan returned home, Yimubai immediately stood up. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'll go heat it up. I'll do it myself. Wen Yuan said softly. It's been a busy day. It's rare for you to be so considerate. He pressed her shoulder. But I'll go. Your eyes are red like a little rabbit. Did you cry? He bent down to be eye level with her and looked into her eyes. Wen Yuan said no. But how could she hide it from him? She clearly did, and it was clear that Su Mo had cried. She probably cried while driving. Yimubai brought her to the kitchen and asked her to sit there while he heated up the food. He said, Su Mo's surgery was very successful. Why are you crying? Wen Yuan looked at his back. He didn't say anything at first, but then he got up and hugged him from behind. Yimubai did his work with one hand and patted her with the other. Why are you acting like a spoiled child again? Mubai, I'm just a little sad. She pressed her face against his back. Su Mo is sick. I didn't know she was sick for a long time. I didn't care enough for her. Yimubai sighed. He knew that his wife wouldn't be in a good mood tonight, so he lowered his voice. Wen Yuan, it's because she has a family and she doesn't want to disturb you. She doesn't want to be with you. She may be able to ask you about the money, but how can she be? I'm still sad, she said softly. It's no good consoling. Yimubai smiled bitterly, but his voice became gentler. Didn't you say that Kong Chiao was going to be with her? Someone will take care of her in the future. You agree as well. Wen Yuan was surprised. He loosened his grip a little and walked to Chu Li's side, looking up at him. Yimubai grunted softly, Kong Chiao isn't a bad person, it's just that this circle. Wen Yuan, really, if my surname wasn't Yi and I wasn't born into this family, I might also be dirty to the point of being unbearable right now. So, I can understand Kong Chao. When Yuan poked his arm. Hey, you've slept with many women. Aren't you dirty? Chapter 4078. Then I'll wash a few more times tonight, He lowered his head and rubbed the tip of his nose against hers a few times. It was very intimate. When Yuan was speechless. I'm not in the mood, and I'm not interested either. Yimubai smiled and didn't force her. He just heated up the food for her, which had not been touched yet. When Yuan sat there eating, and he accompanied her. From time to time, he took the chopsticks and served her food. When Yuan was eating, when she looked up and saw his smiling eyes. She paused for a moment. Why are you looking at me? I want to see you, Yimubai said in a low voice. What's there to see? When Yuan bit her lip. He smiled. I want to accompany you. He reached out his hand and very gently touched her eyes. When Yuan suddenly felt a little touched, but she didn't say anything. She ate quietly and cleaned up the dishes. She turned her head. Yimubai was not there. He was not in the living room either. Xiangnan and Yihui had already gone to bed. She went to check on them for a while, and then continued to look for Yimubai. He was smoking in the study. When he saw her come in, he smiled very lightly. When Yuan stood at the door and thought for a moment. Are you angry? Why are you angry? Talking about my dirty things. He smiled faintly. When Yuan walked over. You said you're not angry, but you're obviously angry. She took the initiative to walk over and sit on his lap. Yimubai put out the cigarette butt and looked down at her. Didn't you say that you're not in the mood and interest? But you're angry. If it can make you happy, sometimes I can sacrifice a little. She hugged him and kissed his chin. I was just joking. Why did you take it to heart? Yimubai leaned back, and when Yuan followed suit and instinctively hugged him tightly. Yimubai hugged her. His voice was low and hoarse. When Yuan, I often feel that if we didn't go through that ridiculous period of time, we would be much happier. At least, you would feel much better. When Yuan hugged him without saying a word. He seemed to think for a while before replying in a low voice, I can't say that I don't mind, but Mubai, if these women always appear, then I'd rather it happen before marriage. I'd rather it happen when I don't know about it. It would be much less harmful than now. He lowers his head and bites her lips. Then why did you run away from home, Mrs. Yi? A small punishment. She murmured and pressed her body against his. Mubai, don't think about it. Let's forget about it, okay? He smiled, but said nothing. But the next day, when Yuan knew why he said that. It was because one of his former women had gone crazy. That woman was Lu Man. Perhaps it was because she was unwilling to accept it, or perhaps it was because KG Entertainment had also rejected her. Lu Man announced to the media that she was pregnant with Yimubai's child. Lu Man was indeed pregnant. But when Yuan was definitely not Yimubai's child. She still had the trust between husband and wife. It wasn't that he couldn't sleep with other women, but he wanted to maintain the relationship between husband and wife. Even if something came to light, he would solve it in time. He wouldn't let things get to this point. Besides, it was impossible for him to get Lu Man pregnant. Of course, when Yuan saw the news, he didn't say anything. He didn't explain under the siege of the reporters. Now the reporters outside were all spreading rumors, saying that they separated because Lu Man was pregnant. He pressed a button and pretended for a long time. There was still one chapter to write. The end of this chapter. Hurry up and read the latest update. Chapter 4079. When Yuan was sitting in the car after class, Yi Mubai called. When Yuan looked at the reporter outside the car and smiled. Boss Yi, are you calling to comfort me or to compensate me? Neither. He smiled lightly. I just want to invite Miss Wen to dinner. Will you do me the honor? When Yuan lowered his head and said softly, aren't you busy with the crisis public relations? Are you still thinking about having dinner with an old couple? Well, he dragged his voice a little and said with a smile, since we are an old couple, does Mrs. Yi believe me a little? When Yuan looked down. Do you want me to believe you? I know you believe me, but I hope you won't be angry. His voice became hoarse, and his tone seemed to be pleading. When Yuan, don't be angry, okay? She was silent for a long time before she murmured, it's hard not to be angry, but I'll try my best. Mubai, I said that these things are in the past, and I won't pursue it. And I also know that this child has nothing to do with you at all. Up until now, he had finally let out a long sigh of relief. Even though he had thought about many things in his heart and was somewhat certain, this certainty was not supported by Wen Yuan in the end. He was still a little worried about gains and losses, and there were many things that he did not dare to do freely. He didn't say much. He only asked her to pick up the child and go back to the apartment first, and he would go home to pick her up later. Aren't Xiangnan and Yihui going? When Yuan asked him. He said, send them to my father's place. He also misses the child. It had been many years since Su Fu and Yi Xinggang divorced. Yi Xinggang was still a human being. He was quite lonely, and he always wanted the children to stay for a few days. At this time, Yi Mubai felt that it was just right. When Yuan thought about it and agreed. At this time, it was indeed necessary to let the children have a quiet space. She first went to pick up Xiangnan and Yi Hui. Xiangnan was a little sensible, and he saw the reporter's little face was tense. And Yi Hui was a little curious by the car window. Mom, why are those people following us? She made a face at him. He's panting like a wolf dog. When Yuan was initially a little depressed, but now, he was amused. Xiangnan looked at Wen Yuan pitifully. Mom, today, some kid said that if I don't have a dad or a mom, you guys will get a divorce. How can that be? Wen Yuan smiled. Aren't dad and mom doing well? Xiangnan's little face was still tense. But mommy moved out. Children were still very sensitive. Originally, they were very happy to move out, but after thinking about it, they felt that something was wrong. When Yuan sighed softly. Haven't mom and dad been staying here for the past few days? Xiangnan, don't think too much. We won't get a divorce. Just now, dad called and said that he would send you to grandpa's place to stay for a few days. What about you guys? Xiangnan was a little worried. Will you divorce, and then Yi Hui and I will be left behind? When Yuan found it funny. I want to take care of Aunt Sumo. She is sick. Besides, Dad wants to go on a date with Mom, and he has to deal with some adult affairs. Xiangnan, we are very good. What you think will not happen, okay? After getting her affirmation for a while, little Xiangnan finally let it go and happily played other things. We're just afraid that will affect the kids for the next few days. How could I not know? Mubai just pitied me for being alone at home. Don't coax me. Yi Xinggang sighed, feeling a little sad. Because he thought of Su Fu. When Yuan wanted to comfort him, but Yi Mubai called. When Yuan picked up the phone. I brought Xiangnan and Yi Hui to Dad's place. Come and have dinner with us. Yimubai was a little surprised. Then, he said softly, "Sure, we can have a candlelight dinner any day." Wen Yuan nodded. His voice was very gentle. "Then I'll wait for you at Dad's place." She was about to hang up when Yimubai stopped her. "Wait, Wen Yuan." Chapter 4081. Wen Yuan was surprised. His voice was a little hoarse. "Let's talk at night." She smiled and said, After hanging up the phone, Yimubai's mind was still in turmoil. He held the breath in his lungs and felt the pain, but the pain was also a little sweet. He took the car key and went out. He got in the car and drove to the old house of the Yi family. At this time, he was followed by reporters all the time. His private affairs were magnified countless times every minute. Fortunately, his family still had some power, so the reporters did not dare to write nonsense. He drove for about 2 hours to the old house. When he jumped out of the car, Yi Hui and Xiangnan ran over and jumped on him. "What two heavy pigs!" He held the two children and smiled. He leaned over and kissed Wen Yuan's face. "The children's mother is heavier." Wen Yuan looked at him with some disapproval. Then, she walked side by side with him and whispered, "Mulan and Shirley will also come with Anton later. Anton also wants to stay here for a few days and play with Xiangnan and Yi Hui." She said and laughed. "Dad will have a headache." Yimubai put down the two children and looked at her. "He will be happy. It has been a long time since it was so lively." Wen Yuan did not say anything. His face was very soft in the night. Yimubai suddenly pulled her and whispered, "Wen Yuan." She nodded and turned to look at him. Yimubai stood in the night and said nothing. He just looked at her with his eyes. His eyes were gentle and very possessive, and the smile on his lips was also very charming. At this moment, Wen Yuan suddenly understood that she had finally got what she had been yearning for many years. She no longer had to be jealous of anyone. At this moment, this man really belonged to her. She looked back at him with her head raised. The surroundings were quiet. Occasionally, there would be the fragrance of flowers, as well as the cries of small insects. This made everything even more wonderful. Finally, he reached out to grab her wrist and gently brought her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. After kissing for a long time, his voice was hoarse. "Have I ever said that I love you? Less talk, more action." She put her arm around his shoulder and smiled. "But I like both." Yimubai's heart throbbed. He looked left and right and then gritted his teeth. "Wen Yuan, you're really getting better at flirting." All men might think that Lu Man was very feminine, but Yimubai was not. Lu Man was just trying to please others and was very superficial. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, was a special woman. All her charm belonged to Yimubai alone. In private, he was not willing to share her charm and looks with others. Wen Yuan put his arms around his neck. "Do you like it?" He gently bit her lips. "How could I not like it? I like it very much." However, it was not suitable for his lover to have an intense affair in the old mansion. He took her to the hall. On the other side, Yi Mulan's car had already arrived. He was about to get out of the car, but Bai Shuali secretly watched Xiao Bai and his wife kissing, so she wanted to peek. Bai Anan did the same. Yi Mulan was a powerful person, but he had no choice but to let them do it. He just complained a little, "Bai Shuali, you will lead Anan astray. Don't you like me very much? How is it bad?" She even talked back to him. Chapter 4082. Yi Mulin unbuckled the seatbelt and carried her onto his lap. Bai Shuali screamed, Yi Mulin, what are you doing? Didn't you say that I like you a lot? Of course, I'm going to like you. Yi Mulin did not do anything immediately. He paused for a moment and the little person in the back seat opened the door and got out, leaving the space for his father to do whatever he wanted. Bai Shuali was furious, Bai Anan. Bai Anan pretended not to hear anything and ran away quickly. Yi Mulin held the steering wheel with one hand and pinched his little worm's chin with the other, playing with it. I want to get off the car. Bai Shuali struggled on his body, but accidentally ignited his anger. She was stunned for a moment and then looked down at the unbearable spot under the expensive clothes. You. Shameless. Her face was a little red as she scolded him. Yi Mulin was still slow and chuckled, You're not a man if I don't react to you like this. Actually, he had not touched her for a few days, mainly because he was too busy. Every night, he would return home at 2 a.m. and wake up at 6 a.m. He could see her throughout the day. Bai Shuali was almost asleep. She had not seen him for a few days, but the traces of sleep on the pillow in the morning showed that he had been back. Today was the day when he was slightly free. Of course, he was filled with anger. You're so shameless. She gritted her teeth, You're so beautiful outside. Do you even care about the occasion? He chuckled, deliberately teasing her and even pulled her hand. Of course, Bai Shuali did not want to. She was shocked and angry, but she did not dare to make a sound, afraid that others would hear. He looked at her for a while and felt that this was not the place. In the end, he let her go. Get out first, I'll wait for a while. When Bai Shuali jumped out of the car, her legs were a little weak. She made a face at him, I'll let you have your eyes. He was still sitting in the car, wearing a classic black suit. He was handsome and his face was slightly restrained because of the love jade. He looked very restrained and seductive. Bai Shuali looked at him and gulped. Suddenly, she felt that her husband was a feast for the eyes. Yi Mulin was still sitting in the car with his long arms and legs, smiling. You can't bear to leave me. Do you want to get in the car? No way. In the end, the rice worm resisted the temptation and backed away. She even made a face at him and called him a pervert. Yi Mulin smiled. He sat in the car and smoked a cigarette to soothe the yuwang in his body. Then, he got out of the car. He tidied himself up and made sure that there were no problems before he walked into the hall. That little idiot thought that he could fall in love with anyone. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that only a man who had lived a good life would have. Being with Shirley might be a little harder, but it would be more fun. He was willing to do it, and he had no regrets. Entering the living room, Gue Sa had already prepared the dishes on the table. The house was bustling, but the livelier it was, the less one person there was. Yi Xinggang felt a little lonely, and this loneliness was due to the absence of Su Fu. After dinner, before his two sons left, he went upstairs and called his ex-wife. Su Fu picked up. The children are all here. These few little ones have been staying with me for the past few days. If you miss them, come over with Hao Yun. Yi Xinggang sighed. He actually missed her. Because he owed her and because he missed her, he could only accept Hao Yun's existence. Chapter 4083. He even thought about competing to see who could live longer. If Hao Yun couldn't outlive him, he might still have a chance to get back together. Even if he could be buried with Su Fu in the end, it would still be good. But he was clear that it was unlikely to happen in this lifetime. Hao Yun lived as he wished, but he was alone now. How could he survive? Actually, so what if he was buried in the same place? Su Fu already had Hao Yun in her heart, and he, Yi Xinggang, was already a thing of the past. He didn't notice what Su Fu said, but when he went downstairs, his eyes were a little moist. The livelier it was, the lonelier it was. It was said that people like Yi Xinggang, who had fallen from prosperity, had nothing in the end. It seemed like he had a house full of children and grandchildren, but in fact, he had lost the most important person in his life. Su Fu, the only woman who amazed him, was still lost by him. So, he hoped that his sons would be well and not follow his old path. He called his second son, Yi Mubai, to the study and gave him a good lecture. Yi Mubai understood that he was reminded of his mother. In this matter, it was Yi Xinggang's fault, but how could he not be lonely now? Dad, there's nothing between me and Wen Yuan. I can't say anything about the past, but I've never thought of hurting Wen Yuan. It's gone after we got married. I can guarantee this. Yi Mubai smiled faintly. Yi Xinggang's expression was a little heavy. After a while, he let out a deep breath. Mubai, if you love her, then treat her well. Don't lose her. If you lose her, you won't be able to find her again. Dad. Yi Mubai whispered. Find someone to take care of you. Yi Xinggang was a little stunned. After a long time, he waved his hand. No need. In terms of taking care of me, no one can take care of me better than your mother. No need. I'm not used to others. Even though he said this, his heart was indescribably sad. It was lonely to be alone. With more people, it was even more lonely. Instead, he missed Su Fu even more. His heart ached a little, but he would never forget the pain. Yi Mubai didn't know what to say. He had left with Yi Mulin. The children stayed behind, and the couple found a place to have a few drinks. They chose a high-class bar with a membership system and chatted in the dark. Bai Shuali and Wen Yuan talked privately. The two women talked about Lu Man and Yi Mubai's past affairs. You're saying that old Bai had a vasectomy and used his finger to make Lu Man pregnant. Bai Shuali lowered her voice and said, It's insider news. I heard that Lao Bai has undergone a vasectomy. Wen Yuan, you know about it, right? Wen Yuan looked at her for a while and lowered his head. Lu Man doesn't know. Bai Shuali's voice was like a sheep's. She did it on purpose. I don't know what she did, but she had an illegitimate child. She wanted to drag Mubai down with her. By the way, why didn't Mubai announce to the public that he had a vasectomy? Wen Yuan smiled. A vasectomy can only prove that the child isn't Mubai's, but it can't prove that he and Lu Man never had sex. Bai Shuali whispered, That's true. What should we do? Wen Yuan smiled. There's nothing we can do. Not responding is the best response. I think Lu Man will either find someone to take over or abort the child herself. She can't blame anyone. Seeing her like this, Bai Shuali felt relieved. Wen Yuan's voice was soft. Shuali, actually, I can understand her very well. Because I've done crazy things to Mubai before. End of this chapter. Chapter 4084. She almost gambled everything she had in exchange for a chance. In the end, she got together with him as she wished. She knew how much pain she had suffered, how many tears she had shed, and how much heartache she had experienced. It wasn't that she didn't mind his past, but that she couldn't afford to mind it. In love, whoever fell in love first was the weaker party and the loser. The only way to turn the tables was to wait for the other party to fall in love with you. Yi Mubai loved her after she had Yi Hui, especially before they got married. She couldn't afford to fuss about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to live a good life. When Yuan knew what she wanted very well. The policy would be tight when it was necessary, and she would let it go when it was necessary to relax. That was why she had minded Lu Man entering Star's entertainment. Now, it proved that her decision was right. Once she entered, it wouldn't be as simple as it was today. Bai Shuali was relieved. She looked up and saw her husband looking at her. His eyes were very clear, as if he was going to eat her. Of course, he was going to eat her tonight. The worm knew that if she didn't listen to him and go home with him, she would be miserable tonight. So she jumped down. I'll go back first. You and old Bai should go home early too. When Yuan nodded and said goodbye to Yi Mulin, Yi Mubai drank the wine in front of him and walked over to hold her hand. Let's go home too. When Yuan looked at him. Let's go back to the villa, okay? Why do you suddenly want to go back to the villa? Didn't you just move out? His smile was indulgent and doting. When Yuan tilted his head. Then let's go shopping and then go to a hotel. Are you sure about a hotel? He stared at her but didn't give her time to refuse. He quickly booked a 5-star super presidential suite, the kind that cost more than 100,000 yuan a night. He didn't even blink and booked it for 3 days in a row. We'll stay there for 3 days, Miss Wen. Let's be in love. He smiled. When Yuan's face was a little red. We just need to be in love and hold hands. We don't need to stay in a hotel. Why don't we stay separately and go home separately? Adults have a different way of falling in love. He grabbed her hand and took a bite. What do you think, Miss Wen? When Yuan hugged his arm. Let's go to a movie, then I want to eat some snacks and take a walk to the hotel. This was what being in love looked like. Yi Mubai smiled faintly and didn't say anything. He just put his arm around her and walked out. Outside the clubhouse, there was a flash of white light. He knew that he had been secretly photographed. He stretched out his hand to block Wen Yuan's face from being photographed. He was a little annoyed that they were being disrespectful to Wen Yuan. He did not want to deal with Lu Man's matter because it had nothing to do with him. Everything was Lu Man's one-woman show. However, he did not want Wen Yuan to be implicated in this kind of scandal. She was someone he wanted to cherish. Therefore, his bodyguard in the dark pulled out the person who took the photo and smashed the camera into pieces. Yi Mubai, on the other hand, held Wen Yuan in his arms and went to enjoy the two of them. The feeling of being in love was indeed very good. On the other hand, the eldest son of the Yi family and his family's rice worm were in love every day. Even Bai Ainan's existence couldn't affect the couple's passion. Bai Shuali was the one who drove the car back. Yi Mulin sat beside her with a lazy expression on his face. She knew that he had not rested for a long time. He had been busy for about a month, going abroad and visiting the south. He was exhausted. I'll make you a tonic when we get back, she said in her little sheep voice as she drove. Oh. Ever since she married him, Bai Shuali had also become younger. Yi Mulin supported his chin with his clean and slender fingers and smiled. I'll cook for you tonight. Chapter 4085. When the little sheep heard that, she knew that it was not going to be an ordinary night. Her face was a little red, and she whispered after a long time, Yi Mulin, can't you control yourself? You want me to control myself? His voice was hoarse. I work so hard for this job, but I can't even hug my wife to my heart's content. What do you think is the meaning of my life? Rice Worm coughed and tried to reason with him. You can't say it like that. Think about it, there are many things in life that you have to do. For example, make love. He continued. Baishuli thought, there's no way to talk about this anymore. They were an old couple, so they were familiar with everything. When they returned to the villa, he carried her into the bedroom. The servants all avoided him. When they reached the bedroom, the rice worm was taught a lesson by the leader. She felt that he was really energetic today. She couldn't stand it anymore, so she put her arms around his neck and praised him. She knew best what he liked to hear. Usually, he would let her go if she had this awareness. However, it was different today. No matter how she begged, he still trapped her under his body and did it again and again. After that, Yi Mulin kissed the fine sweat on her forehead and said hoarsely, "I'm going to take you for a bath." She said, "I want to soak for a while, it's sour everywhere." She looked at him with a complaining look. Yi Mulin smiled. Later, when he was soaking her in the hot water, he said slowly, "When I was socializing with old Zhou and the others at noon, the wine was quite strong." Baishuli caught the hint and grabbed his arm. "They have found a girl." He didn't deny it and looked at her with a smile. He reached out to rub her round earlobe and blew a hot breath on her side. "Your man has been enduring for the whole afternoon. You can also find a girl," she said gloomily. Yi Mulin laughed. "You said it out of anger again." He pulled her to his body and said in a low voice, "If I find someone else, I won't be as energetic as I am now." His action scared her so much that she pressed against his shoulder. "Don't." He slowly tried not to scare her and said in a low voice, "Bear with it." In the end, he was so aroused that he pulled her into his embrace and kissed her lips with all his might. Actually, it wasn't the dragon tiger wine at all. The moment it touched her, he couldn't resist it anymore. Furthermore, he hadn't done it in a long time. After another 2 rounds in the bathroom, Baishuli was so exhausted that she could barely walk. He carried her to the bedroom to rest and bent down to kiss her lips. "I'm going downstairs. I'll call you later." Baishuli immediately wrapped her arms around his neck. "No, I'm not hungry." "I'm hungry, Mrs. Yi. We've done it so many times that I'm starving," he said with a smile. He always felt that being with her was not enough, and he laughed at himself in his heart. He still went to the kitchen. This was the most luxurious villa district. The lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the kitchen were brightly lit, and he could see the swimming pool outside. It was as blue as the blue sky, and there were other villas in the distance. The night was quiet. Yi Mulin stood below, his expression relaxed. In his current position, it was extremely rare for him to relax. Only when he was with Shueli could he feel both physical and mental joy. Being in a high position, he somewhat understood Yi Xinggong's choice in the past. Power was indeed charming, and it was easy for people to get lost. However, he would never do that, because to him, the biggest temptation in this life was by Shueli. Chapter 4086. She was a messy, lazy, and stupid person. But he wanted to give her a lot. Even if he had to give up everything he had, he wanted to make her happy. They didn't have any more children. On the one hand, he didn't want her to bear the pain of childbirth. On the other hand, he wanted to enjoy the married life. Yes, enjoy. He didn't feel it was hard at all. He enjoyed it. A pair of slender arms wrapped around his waist from behind. The face of the little woman who had endured too much was pressed against his back. She said softly, "Yi Mulin, you are so good." She remembered that when she used to follow behind Lao Bai, Yi Mulin would always look at her with disdain, as if she was the stupidest creature in the world. Actually, he was the stupidest. There were so many capable, smart, and beautiful women, but he chose her. "You know I'm good." His voice was really charming. It had a unique masculine tone. Baishuli smiled and asked softly, how did you feel on the day of our wedding? He married her for Lao Bai. She remembered that his face was stinky at that time. Yi Mulin paused and chuckled, you were secretly happy. Bai Shuali said, can you be more serious? On the night of our wedding, I think I raped you. Is that considered serious? He teased her on purpose. Bai Shuali was furious. What rape? You obviously don't know how to do it. You are a rookie. That day, she was in so much pain that he took his pants and went on a business trip. Yi Mulin was still smiling. He put the noodles in 2 exquisite bowls and put one in his wife's hand. His voice was filled with love. Are you comfortable now? Bai Shuali, other than blushing, there is nothing else. Carrying his own bowl, he ran to the small dining room to eat, eating with relish. Yi Mulin didn't eat immediately. Instead, he leaned on the side and smoked a cigarette. He looked at her eating happily and felt satisfied. After smoking a cigarette, he came over to eat with her. Bai Shuali finished eating and didn't want to leave. She looked at him eagerly. I will wash the dishes later. Leave it. Let Auntie do it tomorrow, he said lightly. Bai Shuali didn't want to. It will be done in a while. It won't take much time. As soon as she said this, the eldest of the Yi family looked up at her and said very slowly, wait, I still want to do it 2 more times. Accompany me. Ah, Bai Shuali almost screamed and wanted to run away. As he ate, he caught her with one hand and easily pulled her over to sit on his lap. He finished the noodles in a few bites and carried his little girl back to the bedroom. Bai Shuali kept punching him with her fists. I knew it. It's not good. He did this every time. If he still wanted to do it, he would say that he would give her the noodles next time to make her feel touched. It could also be considered as an intermission. He's so bad, boo-hoo. The eldest brother of the Yi clan chuckled. The noodles are not tasty, so I'll feed you something good, huh? It's your favorite. Bai Shuali blushed and glared at him. I don't have a favorite. How about I do it? I'm also your favorite. He chuckled hoarsely and kissed her for a long time. He only succeeded when he kissed her softly. That night, he was very satisfied. At the same time, the second son of the Yi family was also satisfied. He brought Wen Yuan back to their villa. It was also a gentle night. In such a gentleness, it was as if Lu Man and everything in the past no longer existed, and there were only the 2 of them. They slept until it was almost 10 o'clock. He had to go to the company, so he got up and put on his clothes. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 4087. New wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Latest chapter. When Yuan woke up. Get up and come to the company with me. I'll ask the driver to take you to school or you can go see Su Mo, he kissed her. When Yuan thought for a moment. I'll go see Su Mo. After all, the matter was right there, so she still asked, what do you say about Lu Man? Nothing like that happened. Yi Mubai's voice was very soft. When Yuan, I won't admit it, but I don't want to kick her when she's down. Let's just let it be. When Yuan thought about it and felt that it was true. If Yi Mubai used Lu Man's matter to bring benefits to himself, it would be too unkind and ungentlemanly. He wouldn't explain and just ignore it. She got up. Yi Mubai made breakfast and lunch for her. He planned to take her to eat something good in the evening. The car drove into the hospital and he dropped her off. He went to the company for a meeting. When Yuan went to see Su Mo, but he didn't expect to meet Lu Man. They hadn't seen each other for a long time and Lu Man looked a lot more haggard. However, when she saw Wen Yuan, she immediately got into a fighting stance. Wen Yuan could only sigh in his heart, but he still went up to her. "Do you have time?" Lu Man asked. Wen Yuan saw her hand on her waist, as if she was very concerned about the child in her belly. She thought that she should give the child justice and at least let Lu Man know the truth before making a choice. They chose a coffee shop. Wen Yuan ordered a cup of matcha and Lu Man a cup of water. Wen Yuan sipped the coffee and said in a low voice, "You plan to give birth?" Lu Man looked at him and said very slowly, "Yes, I'll give birth." "Do you want this child or do you want to disgust me? You know that Mubai won't admit this child." Wen Yuan's voice became even lower. Lu Man's lips trembled. "But it's Yi Mubai's child. We had sex at the awards ceremony in Hong Kong." Wen Yuan didn't say anything. Not long ago, Yi Mubai went there and so did Lu Man. They were talking about cooperation at that time, so when Lu Man said that they had sex and had a child, she couldn't refute it. However, Lu Man didn't think of this. "Mubai has had a vasectomy. Even if he slept with you 100 times, he would never let you have a child." Wen Yuan's voice was very soft. "Lu Man, I don't mean to win by telling you this. I just want you to make the right choice." Lu Man was stunned. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. She stared at Wen Yuan and said, "Are you lying to me?" "No, after I gave birth to Yi Hui, he had a vasectomy because we didn't want children anymore." Wen Yuan said quietly, "So this child can't be his. As for whether or not the two of you slept together, I think you know best, Lu Man. You have the best resources. Why waste your youth on a man who doesn't belong to you?" Lu Man's face was still pale. After a long time, she said hoarsely, "I don't believe it." "It's up to you whether you want to believe it or not. You can also give birth to a DNA test. You should understand the results." Wen Yuan's voice was gentle. "Lu Man, this is a child. You shouldn't use it as a tool. Whether you want to give birth or not, it's up to you. But when a child is born, you have to give it motherly love because you decided to give birth to it." After she finished speaking, she stood up and said, "Let's stop here. I don't think you're that stupid." Lu Man sat and waited for Wen Yuan to take a few steps before she suddenly asked, "Why did you tell me? Wouldn't it be better if you didn't tell me? You hate me, don't you?" Chapter 4088. Wen Yuan shook his head. "I don't hate you, nor do I want to see you make a fool of yourself. Lu Man, I'm just a woman who wants to protect her marriage. I'm not wrong, you're the one who's wrong. Don't forget, Yi Mubai is already married. It was Lu Man's choice to reap what she sowed. She wouldn't die if she didn't ask for it. Whether she gave birth to the child or not, she would bear the consequences. Yi Mubai would at most be disturbed by the rumors, but the truth would be revealed in the end. So, it was stupid to use oneself and one's life to take revenge or plot against others. Wen Yuan wouldn't. If this man didn't love her anymore, she would leave without hesitation. So, the one who was loved would be fearless. Lu Man was a loser. She never got anything and had too many delusions. Perhaps, she didn't love Yi Mubai that much. She just couldn't stand the fact that a man didn't care about her. She couldn't stand losing to Wen Yuan, who had no fame at all. Wen Yuan left. Lu Man was still sitting quietly, her hand caressing her stomach. There was really a life here. The father of the child was a rich businessman, but he wouldn't allow her to give birth. Now, she could only abort the child. She couldn't bear the risk of being a single mother. She wanted to be an international star. But, after the abortion incident, after the scandal, she was no longer the Lu Man of the past. She didn't accept any films, didn't go on any variety shows, and was almost banned. Later, she realized how stupid she was. Yi Mubai had Yi Mulin behind her. How could she think that she could escape unscathed? Lu Man disappeared from B City and from the entertainment industry. She lost terribly. When Yuan came to Su Mo's ward, Su Mo listened quietly and said softly, "She's just too conceited. I never thought that Lu Man would be such a reckless person." When Yuan smiled faintly. "That's probably true love." "What true love?" "She's just trying to find the best path after weighing the pros and cons. This kind of person isn't worthy of sympathy. I bet she'll abort the child." Su Mo sat up, his face pale. "I heard through the grapevine that she's very close to the CEO of a corporation. The child's success belongs to that person, yet you still want CEO Yi to be the king." Actually, other than disgusting Wen Yuan, Lu Man's intentions were very sinister. If they were to divorce, she could go after CEO Yi again. Or, she could abort the child and claim that the test was wrong. Or, they could stay together. Lu Man would insist that the child was CEO Yi's. If she gave birth to the child, it would be very disgusting. When Yuan covered her with the quilt. "Don't talk anymore. Rest for a while. It's only been 2 days since the operation. I'm much better now, but I'm still very hungry and can't eat anything," Su Mo muttered. When Yuan smiled. "You'll be able to eat it in a few days. Just bear with it." "Oh right, I only saw a nurse. Where's Kong Chao?" Hearing her question, Su Mo's expression became a little uncomfortable. After a long time, she whispered, "Why are you asking about him?" When Yuan found it strange. "I asked him to take care of you. Of course I have to ask if he's not here." Su Mo looked at her. "I asked him to go back." When Yuan, "I don't want him to take care of me." "What does that mean?" When Yuan also saw that she didn't change her mind immediately. He couldn't force her. After all, she was a patient. "Then tell me what you want to eat. I'll ask someone to make it and send it over in 2 days. Also, you really have to take care of your body." Chapter 4089. Su Mo whispered, "I know." When Yuan reached out and touched her face gently. "It's good that you know. You're the one I'm most worried about." Su Mo was always in her heart. She had never told her that she wasn't feeling well and she knew that she couldn't take care of her all the time. However, things would be different if she had a family. Teacher Kong and Kong Chiao were good choices. This was when Yuan's evaluation after abandoning their relationship. At least Teacher Kong was an upright and easygoing person. Moreover, she liked Su Mo very much. Su Mo could reject Kong Chiao but she couldn't reject Teacher Kong. Teacher Kong came to see her and take care of her. Although she politely rejected him, she couldn't rush him when he was here. Therefore, Teacher Kong was the one who stayed with her every night. This made Su Mo very uneasy. Kong Chiao came over at 9 p.m. His old mother was chatting with Su Mo by the bedside, looking tired. He pushed the door open and entered. Su Mo glanced at him, then said in a low voice, "Take Auntie home, the nurse will be fine." Kong Chiao walked over and squatted down, talking to his mother gently. "You were busy with classes in the afternoon. Why are you here at night?" "I'll stay here." Teacher Kong sighed. "Su Mo is used to me being here. It's inconvenient for a man like you to be here. After all, she's a girl." Hearing her words, Suemo couldn't say anything else. She could only coax her to go home first. It's good that Kong Chiao is here. Teacher Kong, you can go home first. I'm really fine. Dr. Chin's surgery is very good and I don't feel much pain. I can get up and I don't need to be taken care of. There are nurses here too. Teacher Kong looked at her. Then, will Kong Chiao stay here? I'll come back tomorrow afternoon. Suemo knew that it was a trap, but she couldn't do anything about it. She could only watch Kong Chiao and Teacher Kong leave with a bitter smile. The nurse watched from the side and smiled. Kong Chiao is chasing after you. He even used his old mother. He's quite sincere. Suemo lowered her eyes. He's sincere. How can I believe him? As long as Kong Chiao was in this circle, she really couldn't believe him. No, she wouldn't believe him even if he left this circle. Suemo was not naive. In this circle, he was someone who had been tempered by fire and became famous. If you said that he still had a true love, it would be a joke. If Kong Chiao had a true love, it would be Wen Yuan, and not Suemo, who he ridiculed as a mediocre person. To her surprise, Kong Chiao came back after 5 minutes. Suemo slowly lay down. Where's Mr. Kong? He sat by her bed and said shamelessly, I asked the driver to send her back. I don't need anyone here, you can go back. Suemo covered his face with a blanket and coldly said. She had made up her mind to ignore him. Kong Chiao did not force her and smiled, if you don't want me to be here, I'll call my mother over to accompany you. I think the car isn't far. After saying that, he looked as if he was about to make a call. Suemo was so angry that he slapped the phone away from his hand. How shameless can you be? The phone fell onto the blanket. Because she used so much force, her wound was affected, and the pain made her face pale. Kong Chiao couldn't be bothered with the phone anymore and propped himself up. Does it hurt? Let's see if the wound has opened up. As he said that, he pressed his hand on her shoulder and tore off a corner of the blanket, ignoring her objections, followed by the hospital gown. Chapter 4090. When his fingers touched her waist, he felt that it was very thin. She had lost a lot of weight. Coupled with the surgery and the fact that she couldn't eat for the past few days, she could only rely on the nutrient solution. He felt a little distressed and carefully lifted her clothes. Looking at the faint blood on the gauze, he looked up at her and said, There's some blood. I'll ask the nurse to help you change the gauze. Suemo said no willfully, but how could he allow her to say no? He directly asked the nurse next to him to ask the doctor to come over, and Suemo whispered, Didn't you say that I only need to change the gauze? Kong Chiao put down the clothes and the quilt and said in a low and hoarse voice, I'm not a doctor. My words don't count. Let the doctor take a look. Be good. Suemo looked at him and didn't say anything. She gently put her hand on the quilt. He said sorry and said that he hurt her. Suemo listened and felt a little uncomfortable. His words sounded a little inexplicable. The two nurses were whispering and looking over from time to time. The doctor soon came over. It was a male doctor. Kong Chiao frowned and asked, Are there no female doctors? The chief doctor, surnamed Wang, looked at Kong Chiao and said, There are still male doctors in the obstetrics department. Suemo gently pursed her lips and said, Chief Wang, don't worry about him. Chief Wang smiled and said, Men are all controlled at home. He carefully lifted Sumo's hospital gown and looked at the wound. It's not a big deal. I'll help you change the wound. After all, you can't move too much in the future. He was very dexterous and gentle. Although it was the abdomen, Suemo didn't feel anything wrong. Doctors didn't discriminate between men and women. Kong Chao, on the other hand, was very concerned, but he turned this concern into bitterness and swallowed it. After dressing the wound, Chief Wang laughed again and said, "Little girl, you're not bad. I saw you on TV. Let's continue after you recover." Hearing his words, Suemo was a little embarrassed and forced a smile. Chief Wang made a gesture and said, "Okay, let's rest. Bear with it for a while and you'll be able to eat some simple liquid food in 2 days." Suemo nodded and said, "Thank you, Chief Wang." Chief Wang smiled and went out. Before he left, he glanced at Kong Chao's face. The chief doctor left and the 2 nurses also went out. "Mr. Kong, call us if you need anything. We'll be outside." Kong Chao nodded. When he closed the door and returned, Suemo was lying on the bed without making a sound. He laughed. "What's the matter?" Suemo looked at him for a long time before muttering in a low voice, "It's useless, Kong Chao. It's impossible for us." "What do you mean impossible?" He sat beside her, his voice very gentle. "As long as you don't give up, it's possible." Seeing that she didn't look too good, he changed the topic. "Are you hungry?" Suemo ground his white teeth. "What do you think?" As soon as she finished speaking, Kong Chao gave her a warm smile. "I'm hungry too." Suemo turned his head to the side and said, "If you're hungry, go eat. You'd better go home and not come here." There was no one in the ward, so he didn't need to pretend anymore. He leaned over and pressed his face against the side of her pillow. His voice was low and husky. "I'm not hungry." Sumo's face was a little hot, and she was a little annoyed. She wanted to turn around and vent her anger at him, but Kong Chao gently pressed her waist and said in a hoarse voice, "Chief Wang said not to make any big movements, or it'll be bad if the wound reopens." Chapter 4091. She was still staring at him. Kong Chao smiled and got closer to her ear. "It seems that we haven't done it for a long time. I'll feed you when you're better." Suemo really didn't expect that he could say these things to her in the hospital bed. She gritted her teeth, "Kong Chao, if you want to find someone else, you don't lack a bed partner." His expression froze for a moment, as if he was injured. After a moment, he whispered, "There won't be anyone else in the future. I'm serious." She didn't know how to deal with it, but he got up and didn't pester her anymore. Kong Chao came back from outside and didn't eat. He didn't have the mood to eat delicacies, so he directly ordered a takeout. A person with a high status like him only ordered a simple meal and ate it in the ward. Suemo didn't want to talk to him, but she still licked her lower lip when she smelled the fragrance in the air. "Do you want to eat?" He smiled, "Bear with it." She turned her head away angrily. Kong Chao packed his things and came over again. "I wanted to." He said to himself, "Let's have 2 children in the future, okay?" When he said this, Suemo remembered how she looked when she took the morning after pill. The night was so cold, she sat on the road alone and drank about 10 bottles of beer, crying bitterly. And now, he said that he wanted to have 2 children with her. Suemo looked down. There are many people who want to have children with Mr. Kong. He smiled and reached out to touch her head gently. "You were polite to me when my mother was here, but now there is no one else, just call me Kong Chao." He got closer to her. "We have slept together, haven't we?" Suemo stared at him. "There are so many women who have slept with you, why don't you care about them?" This was a question that no man would answer, and Kong Chao was not stupid. He didn't answer her question, but said, "Wan Yun will no longer be my agent." Suemo suddenly looked up. He smiled bitterly. "Suemo, I just want to tell you that I really want to take care of you and cherish you, even if I lose you. Sumo's eyes had changed from shock to calmness. She looked at Kong Qiao and said lightly, "This is just your one-sided thinking, Kong Qiao. I miss someone." Pausing for a moment, his voice was slightly bitter. "Kong Qiao, you are used to this kind of life. Are you willing to do it?" He sighed. "Sumo, you don't know how good you are." He didn't force her and just helped her adjust the blanket. "We've been talking for so long. Take a break. Call me if you need to go to the bathroom." His care was too domineering, and Sumo didn't want to trouble Wen Yuan to take care of her, so she could only accept it. She thought that once she was discharged, they would have nothing to do with each other. Therefore, she stayed in the hospital's VIP ward peacefully. This small ward seemed to have become the sweetest place. Whenever Kong Qiao was free, she would come over. After 2 days, she was able to eat again. Teacher Kong began to give her all kinds of tonics, but Kong Qiao was always the one who delivered them. Their relationship was lukewarm in private, but in the eyes of the nurses, Sumo was the person in Kong Qiao's heart. The reporters also smelled the scent of blood, and they began to pry for information. Ordinary people couldn't enter the VIP ward, but the reporters were very powerful. They already found out that Kong Qiao went to see Sumo, the one who fought with Bai Jingxian last time. Chapter 4092. While Sumo was in the hospital, rumors were already spreading outside. Kong Qiao didn't deny it and directly said that his girlfriend was sick. His girlfriend. It had been on the hot search list several times. Sumo didn't use his phone, so he didn't know anything. It was no wonder that Wen Yuan looked at Sumo strangely every time he came. However, she saw that Kong Qiao didn't want to say anything, so she didn't say anything. Sumo stayed in the hospital for about 10 days and was going to be discharged the next day. That night, Qin Chen happened to be on duty. Qin Chen was still a very special existence in Xingyuan. He was the spiritual pillar of Xingyuan. The appearance of Xingyuan's nurses had been maintained at the top of the industry because of Dr. Qin. Qin Chen carefully examined Sumo and confirmed that there was no problem. "You can be discharged. You can go through the procedures tomorrow morning. I'll talk to the doctor on duty." Kong Qiao smiled. "Thank you." Qin Chen stood up straight and smiled. "I still have to thank Mr. Kong for the surgery fee of 30 million. Not everyone is so generous." Sumo looked at Kong Qiao. Kong Qiao didn't say anything and just sent Qin Chen out. After closing the door, Sumo leaned against the headboard and looked at him quietly. "The surgery fee is 30 million. He smiled faintly. "Yes, Dr. Qin is very expensive." He came over and touched her belly with his fingers. "There's no scar here. It's worth 30 million. At least in the eyes of a straight man, it was worth it." Although he didn't care much about her appearance, as a man, he always wanted his woman to be perfect. Sumo paused. "I'll pay you back later." "How?" "I remember that your money has been put into the home of love. It's not good to take it out now." His voice was hoarse. "How about, we continue our previous relationship, 30 million for half a year?" When he spoke, he was very close to her. Sumo took the opportunity to slap his face. It wasn't too heavy, but the sound was quite loud. This slap made both of them sober. Kong Qiao wasn't angry, nor did he care if there were 5 finger marks on his face. He just smiled. "I just want to take care of you. I don't mean anything else." Actually, she knew it, but she just couldn't help it. This kind of behavior was really not right. She was probably also arrogant because of the favor. Kong Chiao looked at her and let out a long breath. I'm going to smoke. Su Mo looked at his back and slowly sat up, a bit dazed and confused. He said that he was serious and that he wanted to get married. Actually, at first, she was not moved at all. Perhaps it was because she was hurt too badly in the past, so she was not moved no matter what he did or said. Only when she slapped him did he not seem to be angry at all. Su Mo's heart throbbed strangely. However, this throbbing wasn't enough to support her to promise him anything. She wasn't a child anymore. She wouldn't trust anyone so easily. As for Kong Chiao, after finishing his cigarette, he pushed open the door and entered the room. He saw Su Mo sitting at the head of the bed, lost in thought. He smiled and leaned against the door. You will consider me too. Su Mo snapped out of her daze and raised her eyes to meet his playful gaze. She snappily said, Do you like being slapped by women? This habit isn't very good. I'm going to change it. He walked over and sat beside her again. I heard that you declined to live with Wen Yuanqi. Chapter 4093. Kong Chiao smiled. Still living in the same place as before? She nodded. There's nothing bad about it. He agreed. There's nothing bad about it. There are still good memories. Su Mo immediately recalled the memory of Car Z in the car downstairs of the apartment. She blushed and turned away. Please don't say that. What can I say? You don't want to hear it in the future, and you don't want to hear it in the past either. How about now? He said as he moved closer. Say that I want to kiss you. Her body froze, and then her chin was pinched by him. Although it was gentle, it was still forceful. Su Mo bit her lips and stared at him. After a while, she said weakly, Let go of me. Kong Chiao's eyes flashed with fire, and his tight lines made his facial features look like they were carved. He was handsome and charming. He had always been good-looking. Otherwise, how could he have fooled so many women? Thinking of this, Su Mo couldn't help feeling a little cold, as if a bucket of ice water had been poured from head to toe. He moved forward again and finally kissed her. He was very gentle and skillful. The hot breath from his nose seemed to have drilled into her limbs. She wanted to refuse, but she found that she had no strength in her body at all. She could only be kissed by him. Kong Chiao had only wanted to kiss her lightly, but he was an adult man after all, and this kiss was the first kiss he wanted to give her after they were together, so it was especially touching. Plus, she was obedient in his arms. For a moment, he lost control. Following her strength, he pressed her into the soft bed and continued to kiss her. When she tried to resist, he held her hand and intertwined his fingers so tightly that it was as if he was nailing her to the bed. But no matter how passionate he was, he still kept some gentleness and didn't touch her wound. After a kiss, he was not satisfied and wanted more. His thin lips moved to her ear and he murmured, Move to my place, okay? Su Mo didn't say anything. He bit her earlobe discontentedly. I'm moving to a new place. It's clean and there won't be anyone else in the future. Su Mo was still nailed to the bed by him. She couldn't move, but her heart was moving up and down violently. Her face was flushed, and she looked much rosier than usual. Kong Chiao was a little impulsive, and his voice became hoarse. I'll pick you up from the hospital tomorrow, okay? Su Mo bit his lip. Kong Chiao, what are we? She knew he wanted her, his body expressed it very clearly, and he was not afraid of her knowing. Kong Chiao pecked the corner of her lips. Boyfriend and girlfriend, are you satisfied with this answer? Su Mo shook his head and broke free from Kong Chiao's grip. He gently stroked Kong Chiao's forehead and said in a low voice, Kong Chiao, you might just be impulsive. Don't make promises so easily. A lifetime is long, and if you're just acting on a whim, you might regret it very soon. Really, promises are the most fragile thing. You can spend 30 million today, but tomorrow, you might not even be willing to look at me. He grabbed her hand and pressed it against his face. His voice was hoarse as he said, Su Mo, we can wait and see. Su Mo didn't say anything else, she just remained silent. Then, Kong Chiao kissed her again, pressed her down on the bed, and kissed her gently, with 120% love and cherishing, kissed her. She did not refuse, but he did not know what she meant. But he could not stop, and he enjoyed her submissiveness. End of this chapter. Chapter 4094. Su Mo had never experienced such a tender moment before. He was curious and moved. He kissed her again and again until his body was on fire. Then he suddenly got up, his handsome face full of depression, and finally went to the bathroom. Su Mo heard the sound of water and thought that he must be taking a shower. She bit her lips and leaned against the headboard quietly. Her heart was in a mess. When Kong Chiao came out, he had regained his composure. Usually, he slept on the small bed, but today was different. He lay down beside her. Su Mo was stunned and speechless. Kong Chiao. Get down. He lay beside her and pulled her into his arms, glaring at her. If you call me again, not only will I not get down, I'll go in. You're so shameless. She glared at him with her face flushed red. Seeing that he had angered her, he softened his voice. All right, I'm just lying down for a while. I'm not doing anything. He wanted her, but this was a hospital and it was inconvenient. And Su Mo's body wasn't fully recovered either. Su Mo ignored him and ignored him. Kong Chiao hugged her from behind and buried his face in the side of her neck. It was so hot that she couldn't ignore it. Su Mo endured it. After all, she would get rid of him after she was discharged. Qin Chen came out of the hospital and went straight to Chiu Garden, where Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were staying. Surprisingly, the couple who didn't get along were there too. It was Qin Mo and He Huan. Qin Chen got off the car and closed the door with a smile on his face. She remembered that He Huan was only staying in City B for a few days. It had been 10 days and she hadn't left yet. Did she get back together with Qin Mo? He Huan and Qin Yi Huan were playing on the swing. He Huan was petite and small, but she was dressed very casually. She wore a white t-shirt and a pair of jeans. Her skin was a healthy wheat color because she had been abroad for many years, and her hair was thin and short. Qin Chen lowered his eyes and noticed that she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, so he understood in his heart that these extra few days were probably a ploy by Qin Moyu after he wasn't satisfied. Hi, sister-in-law. Qin Chen went over and greeted her handsomely. He Huan turned around. Chen Chen. Qin Yi Huan called out cheerfully, Uncle Qin. He Huan said helplessly, it's Aunt. Qin Chen picked Yi Huan up, lifted her up, and kissed her again. Our Yi Huan can call me whatever she wants. He Huan only smiled at her broken worldview and played with her fingers. She had a good relationship with the other members of the Qin family, except for Qin Mo. Qin Chen didn't know what was wrong with this couple. In any case, they hadn't been harmonious ever since they got married. Looking at her second brother, he should be like her eldest brother. He looked refined on the outside, but in fact, he was the type that lived well in Q University. Her eldest sister-in-law shouldn't be unhappy with him. Why did they have to travel all over the world? Their married life was like the cowherd and weaver girl, year after year. After coaxing Yi Huan, Qin Chen placed her on the swing and let her play. He lowered his voice and asked, "How long do you plan to stay this time?" She looked at Yi Huan and knew that the little fella was listening attentively. Hence, she lowered her voice even more. "Yi Huan is growing up. You guys can't always live apart." Yi Huan seemed a little distracted. After a while, she said softly, "I've mentioned a divorce before, but Qin Mo isn't willing. I don't know why he insists on such a marriage. It doesn't make much sense." The moment she said that, she seemed to have sensed something and turned around. Qin Mo was standing behind them. Chapter 4095. Qin Chen also saw it and coughed lightly. "You guys talk, I'll take Yi Huan to eat something." With that said, he picked up little Yi Huan and walked towards the big house. Qin Yi Huan turned her head and widened her eyes. When she turned back, she whispered, "Auntie, will Dad and Mom really divorce? Who will I follow?" Qin Chen tugged at her pigtails and said absent-mindedly, "Did you hear that? And you call me auntie?" Little Yi Huan would only be called correctly when he needed help. Qin Chen felt a little bitter. The couple had been at odds for several years, and the most pitiful one was Yi Huan. She was often left in the big house, not loved by her father and mother. In the garden, Yi Huan looked at Qin Mo for a few seconds, then sat on the swing and swayed gently. Qin Mo had just returned from the company and was still in his formal wear. He walked in front of her and did not allow her to escape. His voice was so deep that it was about to drip water. "So this is the reason why you stayed for a few more days." Yi Huan was still very happy, but she did not know that you were still thinking about not wanting her. "I didn't abandon her." Yi Huan glanced at him. Qin Mo went forward. "Then you want custody?" "Yi Huan, don't even think about it." He was a little annoyed, so he took off his coat and threw it on the bench. He sat down with his long legs and stared at her in the thin dusk. They actually had a good time. It was good when they got married, but then there was a misunderstanding. Yi Huan frequently went abroad and rarely came back. If it wasn't for Yi Huan's birth, she probably wouldn't have returned to China at all. She didn't speak, and Qin Mo's gaze was a little ugly. "Why, you're not talking." "Feeling guilty." "Why would I feel guilty?" Yi Huan's face was a little pale. "Qin Mo, do you think it's interesting for us to go on like this? An unhappy family is not good for Yi Huan. Why don't we?" Before she could finish, he stood up and walked in front of her. He leaned forward and said, "Yi Huan, you're not doing this for Yi Huan. You're doing this for yourself. Because he's still alive, you regret marrying me, don't you? You still think about him and want to go back to that man. Let me tell you, I'll never divorce you in this life. Just give up." Yi Huan stared into his eyes. There was only anger and a trace of hatred in his eyes. She smiled. "Qin Mo, you can be angry too. I thought you weren't." She smiled bitterly. The next second, he grabbed her chin and stared into her eyes. "Don't think that I don't know that he's also in the country. That's why you stay in the country and don't go anywhere. You go to the library to see him, but he might not remember who you are. Yi Huan, do you dare to tell him that you're married? Do you dare to tell him that you have to lie under me every day and be fucked by me all night? Do you think that you can be with him just because you're divorced?" His eyes were filled with coldness. "There's no such thing in this life. Either you fulfill my wish, or you destroy me. Fulfill or destroy." Yi Huan lowered her gaze, her voice so low that it sounded like she was sighing. Chin Mo, do you know anything about my past? How much do you know? Actually, you don't know anything. He didn't hear it clearly, and she didn't want to say too much. She jumped off the swing and wanted to walk into the mansion. However, Chin Mo grabbed her hand and pulled her into his embrace. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 4096. He Huan sat in his arms and said coldly, Chin Mo, what on earth do you want? He pinched her chin with his long and cold fingers and glanced at her face. Stay here and don't mention divorce again. He Huan looked down. Chin Mo, do you think this kind of marriage is interesting? He pinched her chin and forced her to look up. He narrowed his eyes and said in a low and husky voice, I think it's very interesting, especially when I tie you to the bed, Mrs. Chin. He Huan slapped him in the face without thinking. It was a loud sound in the dark. Chin Mo's eyes were filled with anger. He put more force into his fingers and easily left a bruise on her white chin. She was in pain, but she didn't make a sound. He sneered. You're really numb to me, aren't you? You don't even scream in pain, huh? He was so jealous that he couldn't care less. He pulled her to the main house and went upstairs, passing the people in the living room. He Huan didn't want to, so he dragged her. Chin Chen was shocked. Chin Mo. Stay out of it. This is between me and your sister-in-law. Chin Mo's voice was so cold that it almost froze everyone. Chin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were also stunned. Chin Mo, you're crazy. He Huan is your wife. Not another woman. But Chin Mo didn't seem to hear it. He pulled He Huan and said coldly, Dad, Mom, we have something to talk about. Chin Anlin said coldly, you're making trouble. But no matter how he tried to stop him, Chin Mo still took He Huan to his bedroom. The door slammed with a loud bang. Chin Chen lowered his head. Yi Huan was stunned. Is Dad going to hit Mom? The adults didn't know how to answer, and it was not good for parents to intervene when their son was obviously going to have a rough married life. At this time, Yi Muyun came back with Tang Xiaoxue. Seeing the scene, he smiled and said, What's wrong? Chin Anlin looked at his eldest son and sighed. He sat down and said, It's all because of Chin Mo. My wife finally came back, but she didn't have a good meal. Yi Muyun was almost 40 years old, the most mature and charming age for a man. He took off his coat and sat down. Dad, you know that He Huan rarely comes back, and Chin Mo probably has been hungry for a long time. They're all men, so they can understand. Chin Anlin looked at his eldest son and cursed in his heart. Muyun, he's using violence to coerce his wife. That's also the fun between husband and wife. Yi Muyun dismissed his father with a few words. Who hasn't been young before? He gently brought up the shameful things his father did when he was young. For a moment, Chin Anlin touched his nose and didn't know what to say. He even stole a glance at his wife. Fortunately, Liangqiu didn't say anything. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to keep his old face. Chin Anlin sighed in his heart. Of the 5 children, other than the one who couldn't be exposed, Chin Mu was the only one who was slightly more normal. There was no need to talk about Chin Chen, he was so handsome that he could go abroad. Every day, there would be a group of women shouting that they wanted to give birth to monkeys for Dr. Chin. Muyun and Chin Mo were the same kind of weird people. Chin Mo had learned his big brother's tricks completely. Chin Anlin didn't think about it at all. Dragons gave birth to dragons, and phoenixes gave birth to phoenixes. They were all his excellent genes, and the only girl who had mutated was probably Chin Mu. End of this chapter. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.